all here to see. Emma, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Teo, and thank you so much for having me again. I can't remember what it was. I know it was some point last year, I think I joined you, but it's lovely to be back again. So I'm just I put a link in the chat, which I would explain, but I just have to do it before I share screens because it won't let me do it whilst I'm sharing screens. So let me just get my screen up. Teo, can you see that okay?
Yes, it's definitely worked.
Amazing. I'm going to try and put it into slideshow so it's a bit easy to see, but it's delayed reaction in doing it, so hopefully it will.
I feel like I'm a bit delayed today as well, so I understand.
It's the heat. It's the heat. Anyway, we are there. We are there. So thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to see you all this evening. As Teo said, I'm a registered nutritional therapist. I specialise in women's health and particularly endometriosis, largely because I've got endometriosis myself, and it was my own sort of journey with trying to find a way to manage my own endometriosis symptoms that got me into nutritional therapy, which I'll tell you a bit more about later. I'm also a member of a local endometriosis support group, so I know how great these groups are in getting advice and support and getting ideas from other people. I now work completely online, so the benefit of that is I can come and join groups like yours and sort of work with people across the UK. And my sort of take on endo is it's such a tenacious condition, isn't it? It just affects so many things, keeps coming back and back. That it's one of these things that I think it's worth throwing a lot of different things at it, almost coming at it from a number of different angles. And nutritional therapy can work really well with endometriosis, either as a sort of standalone thing that you do. It can work well alongside other alternative therapists, so people do things like acupuncture or homeopathy, but it can also work well alongside any sort of conventional medical treatment you might be having, whether that's you're on hormone treatment or pain medication, or maybe you're sort of preparing for surgery or recovering post-surgery. It's not a sort of either or. And it can also be helpful with fertility as well, and with fertility treatment. So wherever you are really on your endo journey, then I think nutrition has things that potentially it can offer and it can help with. So what I plan to do this evening is briefly talk through a bit about my own endo journey, because that's sort of how influences how I work really with other people with endo. Run through almost like my 5-point starting point for working with people with endo. That'll give you the sort of basics of some of the things to put in place, and that will include some of the foods that you can put in your diet that potentially can help with endometriosis symptoms, and also a few of the foods that maybe may not be helping that you might want to take out, although my approach is much more on putting foods in rather than taking them out. And then I'll also just touch on a little bit about sort of further support or any further information. So let's kick off. So my own endo journey is probably familiar to a lot of people and similar to a lot of other people's, and that I had painful periods from the age of 12, but just accepted that as the norm, like that was how periods were. And gradually that pain progressed, it became more intense, it went on for longer. So it wasn't just during my period, it was like before and after my period. I used to get sort of bad PMS, get really tired. And it was only actually when I was a student at university and had left home, and my housemates were like, this isn't normal, that you're in bed for a couple of days every month and you're always walking around clutching your stomach or with a hot water bottle, and sort of encouraged me to go to a GP about it. And again, as often happens, there was no like referral or diagnosis or anything. It was just, oh, take the pill, this will sort everything out for you. And of course that's what I did, because we want a quick fix, don't we? So I took the pill and I yo-yoed on and off the pill really most of my 20s. Obviously I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't done that, But for me, I always got really bad side effects with the pill. So I would take it for a bit, might make my cycle more regular, maybe make a slight difference to my symptoms, but then the side effects would be so bad I'd have to stop taking it. Then I'd try and like go it alone for like 6-9 months or so. Then the symptoms would get really bad again. So then I'd end up back on the pill. And during this probably 9 years or so that I yo-yoed on and off the pill, my endo symptoms gradually got worse. And I've got to the point where I had like constant pain all month long, day and night, and then really intense pain during my periods. I had no energy, but I was anemic and I just could not get my iron levels back up. I had really bad PMS. I used to get a lot of bloating, IBS, and it got to the point where the pain was so bad it was a struggle to even walk down to the end of the road, because I would just get this like searing pain with every step I took. And I was having so much time off sick. Luckily I had a really sympathetic line manager at the time, otherwise it may have been a struggle to stay in work. But what tipped things for me was I then started getting bladder symptoms as well. So it was like having cystitis, got a lot of irritation in the bladder. I always wanted to pee, but there was never any infection. And it was at that point of me going to the GP like every 2 weeks saying I've got cystitis that he was like, I'm going to refer you to a gynecologist, something isn't right. Had a laparoscopy, got diagnosed with endometriosis, and I was like, oh great, finally there's an explanation for all these symptoms that I've been having. And so of course you think there's also a way of treating that. And then at my follow-up appointment I was told surgery to remove the endo wasn't an option for me, and my only option was stronger hormone treatment. And I had a real dilemma because I felt so awful and so desperate. I knew I had to do something, but at the same time the thought of stronger hormone treatment really scared me, given that I'd never really got on with the pill. So I decided to kind of hit the pause button on the hormone treatment, give myself 6 months to try and find another way of managing the condition that didn't involve hormone treatment. And I was obviously really motivated to try and find something that would help. And I was at that point where I've done absolutely anything if you told me it might have made a slight difference to how I was feeling. So I dabbled around in lots of different alternative therapies and found that for me, nutritional therapy, and I also did a bit of homeopathy, really made a big difference to my symptoms. It didn't happen overnight. It's not a kind of quick fix. It was a slow, gradual process of improvement. And I did have a few ups and downs along the way, which often is kind of how it goes. But slowly and gradually, I got my symptoms back under control. My pain reduced. I didn't get it as frequently. My energy levels came back up. The sort of PMS calmed down. The bloating eventually went away. The IBS went away. The bladder calmed down. And definitely, I felt like I got control back over my health. Even now, obviously, I've still got endometriosis. I still have symptoms, but at very low levels. So I would say now I get pain 2 days a month on the first couple of days of my period, not constant. It's sort of on and off, and it's fairly mild. I wouldn't even take painkillers for it, which is like a massive difference compared to how I was sort of 15, 20 years ago. I can still get a flare up. I would say 9 times out of 10 when it happens now, I know why. It's either that I've got like overtired, overstressed, or eaten too many of the foods that I know for me are potential triggers, and I can usually calm it back down again within a couple of days. So in terms of what might be going on endometriosis wise, what we might work with from a nutritional therapy approach, so many different things. You know, often you hear people say, when you say, oh, I've got endometriosis, people are like, oh, I know what that is, it's painful periods. We know it's not. It's so much more than that. It is a whole body disease. It affects so many different systems in the body. We can potentially have so many different symptoms going on, which might appear unrelated, but often are quite related. So, you know, we know some of endo is hormone driven. And often that, that's one of the approaches that the conventional medical system will take, is to give us hormones to try and sort of regulate the hormone balance that's going on in the body. And sometimes that does help. It can make a big difference, but it's not dealing with some of these other things that are going on, hence why it may not get you perhaps as much relief as ideally you might like. So stress hormones we'll come on to later, but they play a big part in endometriosis symptoms. The pain is a massive thing going on that we need to work with. Some people it involves the bladder as well, as it did me. It can have a big impact on energy levels, so that might be about low iron, but actually it can just be like the level of inflammation going on, the sort of hormone imbalance, it's enough to affect our energy levels. Sleep, obviously it has an impact on sleep. If we're in pain, we can't get comfortable, that can be a problem. We can get sort of blood sugar imbalances, so either can't miss a meal, would get quite faint, lightheaded with it, headachy, or get a lot of like cravings for sweet foods, all signs that our blood sugar maybe a bit out of balance, and that might be impacting on hormone levels, which then impacts the endo. There's been sort of more recent research showing that the immune system is actually also involved in endo. It kind of almost like lets the endo develop, and often people with endo have quite low immune systems, get lots of colds, flus, struggle to get rid of them. It can impact on the nervous system. Obviously having this condition is really stressful. People can get low mood, anxiety, depression. The liver is part of the picture as well, so the liver is really important in dealing with our hormones. And then gut health as well. I think I saw something recently that said that just over 80% of people with endo also have some kind of gut issues, whether that's bloating or IBS. And I think what frustrated me when I was sort of starting out on this endo journey was I would go and see the gynecologist who'd talk about pain and he'd talk about hormones, but wouldn't talk about any of these other things. So the gynecologist I saw wasn't really interested that I was getting bladder symptoms. I would get referred to a urologist who then wasn't interested that I had endo, and no one was sort of taking account of all these different things that were going on. And that is one of the things that really appealed to me about nutritional therapies. It does try to take account of all the different symptoms you might have, and it very much sort of tailors its approach to you as an individual. So it's not, oh, you've got endo, do this. It's, everyone is with endo is different. We will have different symptoms, different lifestyles, different diets, and so we need to sort of tailor an approach to you as an individual. And what we do in one-to-one nutrition sessions is do a really detailed assessment, so we can try and look at all these different things going on in the body, work out where the imbalances are, and then work out what are some of the factors that might have caused those imbalances, or what keeps them there. So we know, particularly with endo, it can keep coming back. So some people, for example, have surgery, it makes a massive difference to them. They say symptom free. Other people can have surgery and, quite quickly, maybe a year, 18 months later, they're getting symptoms back again. So some of that might be about the surgery that was done and how it was done. But also, I think, so what we're doing with surgery is we're removing the endo, but we're not necessarily dealing with some of the underlying factors that might be driving the endo. And so there is that risk then it might come back. Whereas what we're doing with nutritional therapy is trying to sort of work on some of those underlying factors, some of those imbalances, and trying to get them in a better balance. And we can do that with food, with supplements, but also lifestyle factors. So things like stress management, sleep, relaxation. These are massive things with endo. And certainly when I first sort of started out in this journey, went to see a nutritional therapist, I did the diet and the supplement stuff with military precision, and I did get some improvements. And then after a while, it was like things just plateaued and things were better than they had been. But equally, I'd still got a level of symptoms going on that I just could not seem to shift. And I was getting really frustrated with it. And it's only when I really started working on the lifestyle stuff that I then got more improvements. So it really is quite an important part of the whole managing endo picture. So what we'll do in the rest of the talk is just kind of quickly run through, as I say, my sort of basic starting point with endo, which is around reducing inflammation, working on gut health, supporting the liver, balancing hormones, and then reducing stress. So what I've done on the slides as well is just put some references on. So with nutrition research, unfortunately, there aren't large-scale randomized control trials with thousands of people in the way there is in drug research, basically because there isn't the funding for nutrition research, but there is a little bit of research that backs up some of this. So obviously with endo, we know it's an inflammatory health condition, and there's actually been research done in women that have abdominal surgery, and in women with endometriosis, we have much higher levels of these inflammatory prostaglandins in the pelvis. So these are these hormones that cause the sort of like contracting pain that you can get with endo. So certainly working on reducing inflammation is really important to bring down pain levels. And there are lots of foods that help reduce inflammation. You might have heard things about an anti-inflammatory diet, which is really helpful for things like endo. So fruits and vegetables are full of a lot of these anti-inflammatory compounds, but also vitamins and minerals that help with things like energy and hormone balance. So really important to try and get plenty of fruits and vegetables in your diet. Also spices. So sometimes we don't think of spices as you know, being that helpful. We just put a sprinkle of something on whatever we're cooking, but they can be quite potent. So ginger and turmeric particularly are really anti-inflammatory, so trying to get those into as many foods as possible can help. So I would have them in like teas, I would put them in porridge or overnight oats, put them in a smoothie, put them in soup, stir fries, curries, stews. It's quite easy to get them into quite a lot of different foods. And then the final one is omega-3 foods. And there's been quite a lot of research on omega-3 foods in reducing inflammation, helping with period pain, helping with endometriosis pain. And the best source of omega-3, if you eat oily fish, which I know not everyone does, but things like salmon, mackerel, sardines are really good sources of omega-3. If you don't eat fish, then chia seeds and walnuts are also good sources of omega-3. So I put the link I put in the chat at the beginning of the talk, which I'll come to later in the slides, actually, if you didn't get it, so don't worry, is a link to an ebook, free ebook that you can download off my website, that summarizes a lot of what we talk about tonight, some of the foods that are good to include, but it also gives you some recipe ideas to put that into practice, because I find sometimes you give people a long list of foods and it's like, oh, how the heck do I get all these into my diet regularly? So it just gives you some ideas about how to do that. And there's one recipe in there which is an overnight oats recipe. It's got apple and carrot in, it's got ginger in it, it's got chia seeds, walnuts in it. I think I might put blueberries in it as well. So that's quite an easy way to get in lots of these anti-inflammatory foods in one go. So that's what I try and do with one-to-one clients, is find things that are ticking lots of these boxes, so it's kind of easier to get these foods in than trying to think, oh, I've got like 12 foods I need to get in today. It's giving you ways of getting them all in quite easily. So there are also some foods that can increase inflammation in the body, and so might be adding to pain levels. So red meats and processed meats can be inflammatory, dairy produce, unhealthy fats. So by that I mean fats that have been quite sort of altered, processed, aren't in their natural state. So things like margarine, trans fats that you find in things like shop or pastries or biscuits or things. Processed foods can be inflammatory, and if you do get gut symptoms, particularly bloating, Then some of the sort of like additives, preservatives and things in processed foods in some people can aggravate bloating and gut symptoms. Sugar can be inflammatory, and sugar can also actually affect the gut and bloating. And then gluten's a really interesting one, because this is one of the few areas in endonutrition research where there has been a randomized control trial. And they had a group of people with endo who went on a gluten-free diet and another group who continued eating gluten. And the people in the gluten-free group had a 75% reduction in their pain levels from taking gluten out of their diet. And we obviously don't know like how big that pain reduction was, but some level of reduction in their pain. And there's been some research showing that people with endo are often sensitive to gluten. And when we eat it, it can set off a bit of a sort of inflammatory response in the body. What I would say though is, you know, if you've seen stuff before about the endo diet, you'll see this list and others of foods that people say take out. That's not the way I approach things now. So when I first saw a nutritional therapist, I was told take out all these foods all at once. And there were foods that I ate, all of those foods, and it was really difficult to suddenly be told you can't eat any of those, particularly when you're tired and in pain and not feeling great. So my approach now in one-to-ones is I don't say cut all these foods out. What we'll do, often people have an idea. So when you're talking through, you know, diet and symptoms, people often say, oh, actually I do get a bit bloated when I have dairy, or, you know, my pain sometimes is a bit worse if I've had a lot of dairy or gluten or whatever it is. So sometimes people already have an idea of what their trigger might be. So we might just take that one food out for maybe 3 weeks, see what difference it makes. For some people, these foods aren't going to trigger your symptoms. So for me, my triggers were gluten and sugar. So dairy made no difference to me whatsoever. I could eat dairy all day and it wouldn't aggravate my symptoms. So they're not always triggers for everyone. So you don't always need to cut them all out. What I do is, so with the dairy example, I'm mindful that dairy can be inflammatory and I've got an inflammatory health condition. So I just limit it. I don't cut it out, but I don't have it every day. So sometimes there are ways around it that you don't have to make it sort of super restrictive and super difficult. So next up is gut health. As we said, you know, gut symptoms quite common with endo, and there's been some more, maybe the last like 5-10 years or so, some recent research that shows that in women with endometriosis, there are often differences in our gut bacteria, and we tend to have more of the bad bacteria around. And our gut bacteria can have an impact on our hormone levels. And one of the ways it can do that is when our estrogen's been used, it goes to the liver to be broken down, and then it moves into the intestines, ready to be got rid of in a bowel movement. If we're not having regular bowel movements, if we've got constipation, which can be quite common with endo, particularly if you've got high pain levels, what can happen if you've got a particular type of bad bacteria is that estrogen that's just sitting there ready to be got rid of actually gets reabsorbed back into the body, and so it's increasing our hormone levels, which we don't want to do with endo. The other reason gut health is really important is, as we mentioned earlier on, the immune system has an impact on the development of endometriosis, and around 70% of our immune system is actually sitting in the gut. So keeping our gut healthy also keeps our immune system healthy. And it's also where we absorb all our nutrients. So we can be eating loads of great foods, but actually if our gut isn't too healthy and we can't absorb those foods, we're not getting the benefit from them. So gut health is a real biggie with endo. So some of the ways that you can support your gut health food-wise is firstly prebiotic foods. So these are effectively like the food supply for the good bacteria that we want to encourage. And these are basically found in fruits and veg. So again, fruit and veg, they're anti-inflammatory, but they're also helping with our gut health. We can have probiotic feed. So Probiotics are effectively the good bacteria that we're directly putting into the gut with feed. So things like kefir and live yogurt are good sources. If you are dairy free, obviously you can get non-dairy versions that still have the live bacteria in. And then some stuff that sounds really basic, but sometimes we forget it, and it can make a big difference. So just keeping well hydrated, having like 6 to 8 glasses of fluid a day, helps keep flushing things through the digestive system and can help reduce constipation. And then also just making sure that we chew food really well. Now, often we're rushing, we're eating food on the go, got to dash off to whatever we're doing next, and don't chew and break down the food. And if we haven't broken down the food well, and then you get bloating, that can just make things a little bit more difficult. So sometimes just doing those basics actually can help too. So the third area is around supporting the liver. And the liver is really important in breaking down our used hormones and trying to get rid of them as quickly and safely as possible. And when the liver breaks down estrogen in particular, it can go into sort of one of 3 different pathways. So there's like the good estrogen pathway that we want to encourage, that keeps our bones healthy, is good for us, particularly as we move into kind of menopause. There's the not so good estrogen, which encourages cells to grow. So that encourages conditions like endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So probably most of us are pushing estrogen through that particularly pathway. And then there's the kind of bad estrogen pathway, which can contribute to hormone-related cancers like breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So we will all break down estrogen into those 3 different pathways, and that's fine. It doesn't mean we're all going to get polycystic ovarian syndrome or cancer. What becomes problematic is if we're pushing a lot of estrogen down that particular pathway, so down that endo pathway. And one of the things we can do to help to kind of like nudge estrogen out of that endo pathway into the good protective estrogen pathway, we can do it with foods. And then the other thing in terms of liver support is often with endo, we are taking painkillers, medications, hormone drugs, and they all go to the liver to be broken down too. So it just means that the liver's having to work a bit hard, and so we need to give it a little bit of support. So 2 of the kind of easy ways to support the liver are, again, the hydration. So making sure you've got 6 to 8 glasses of fluid. That might be water, it could be herbal teas, it could be soups, it could be smoothies, to keep things flushing through the liver and getting rid of used hormones, any toxins. And then one of the best things that you can do for endo, anything hormone related, is eating cruciferous vegetables, because there's a compound in cruciferous vegetables that helps the liver break down estrogen safely. So it pushes it out this endo pathway into this kind of safe estrogen pathway. So I would say, if you do one thing from this, because sometimes this can feel a bit overwhelming if I'm giving you loads of suggestions. If you do one thing, or if you just start small with one thing, start with the cruciferous vegetables. So by cruciferous vegetables, I mean things like broccoli, kale, cauliflower, cabbage, watercress and rocket. And they're also a good source of, anti-inflammatory compounds, vitamins and minerals as well. So they really are good for endo. Now, unfortunately, in some people, cruciferous vegetables can make bloating worse. Which is really frustrating, because I had this as well, and it was like, here's a food that could really help with my endo, and I can't eat it because it just makes the bloating pain so much worse. So if that is you, then what I would say is test out different cruciferous vegetables, because sometimes you might react to some more than others. So I found that I could eat watercress and rocket, but I couldn't eat any of the other cruciferous vegetables. So I just had to eat a lot of those until I could tolerate some of the others. The other thing that might help is some people find that if you, say broccoli, for example, if you have it broken down, say in a soup or a smoothie or something, you might tolerate it a bit better because your digestion hasn't got to do as much work to break it down. So you'll see in the ebook, there's quite a few soup recipes that have got things like broccoli or cauliflower in. There's also some smoothie recipes as well that have got some of these cruciferous vegetables in. So again, it's trying to sort of tick off several boxes in one go by getting them in your diet. If you don't like the taste of cruciferous vegetables, which again, I know not everyone does, they are quite a sort of strong bitter taste, which is part of the reason of why they're good for the liver. Then what I would recommend is there's a smoothie recipe in the ebook, which is frozen cauliflower and frozen berries. That probably sounds really weird, but give it a go. It does work. Cauliflower is not my favorite vegetable. I eat it because I know it's good for me, but it's not my favorite. But in that smoothie, you really can't taste the cauliflower if you get that kind of balance right of the berries and the cauliflower. And it's quite easy because you can just keep them in the freezer and then sort of make them when you have time. So the kind of like fourth part of all this is balancing hormones, given again, you know, one of the things that can drive endo is this, you might have heard the term estrogen dominance, which basically means there's across your cycle, so you would usually have more estrogen in the first half of your cycle and then more progesterone in the second half of your cycle, and they kind of balance each other out across the cycle. But when we're in this estrogen dominant situation, there's more estrogen around over the month than there is progesterone. Now that might be that your estrogen level is high, but it might not be. Your estrogen level might be, you know, completely normal. What might be going on is your progesterone level is low, so that it just means that estrogen then becomes the dominant hormone. So there's a few different reasons why this can happen. So one of them we talked about is, you know, constipation. We're not getting rid of that used estrogen, and so it's coming back into circulation. So that can make us estrogen dominant. It can be about the liver, you know, not breaking down estrogen very well, not getting rid of it quickly. That can be the issue. But the other one is stress. Can actually push us into estrogen dominance and make our hormone balance worse. And the reason for that is when we're stressed, we pump out lots of cortisol, our stress hormone. And some of the raw ingredients that we need to make cortisol are really similar to the raw ingredients that we need to make progesterone. And because cortisol is always going to be the dominant hormone in the body because it's designed to sort of keep us safe, keep us out of danger, those raw materials will all go into producing cortisol, and there might be very much left for progesterone. And so we can end up with this low progesterone level, and so estrogen dominant. So hence why the lifestyle stuff is really important in terms of the stress management. And then the final one is actually if our blood sugar levels are high. So particularly if we're eating a lot of sweet foods, and I know I hold my hands up to this, you know, if you get PMS, often what we crave is the sweet food, but actually a lot of sugary sweet food is not helping with our hormone levels. So how do we balance hormone levels with food? Well, the first one is around trying to balance those blood sugar levels. So trying to avoid sugar, sugary snacks, sugary foods, and going for more whole grains. So rather than so like white bread, going for wholemeal bread or sort of whole grain bread. Another way actually is reducing dairy. So as well as dairy potentially being inflammatory, it can also make our hormone balance worse. And the reason for that is sadly these days cows are pumped full of hormones so that they produce more milk. Chickens are pumped full of hormones so that we get bigger chicken breasts in the supermarket. And if we're then eating those products, potentially we're also taking in some of those external hormones, which we want to try and avoid. You know, we've got enough internal hormones going on without topping them up externally. So either maybe reducing the amount of meat you eat or going for organic or grass-fed meat can help with that. It doesn't necessarily take the problem away, but it can help. And again, those cruciferous vegetables really helpful with hormone balance. And then finally, it's all around the kind of stress, which, as we've talked about, it can have an impact on our hormones. It can make us feel more tired. It increases inflammation in the body, so it can make pain worse. Sometimes people find, you know, if they're going through a stressful period and they've got a lot going on, that often they get an endo flare up, and that's probably why. It can reduce our immune system, so it doesn't work as well, so we get more colds, flu, but obviously that's also linked with endo. It can take out certain nutrients in the body, so particularly something like vitamin C, which is good for the immune system, which is anti-inflammatory. If we're stressed, our vitamin C levels really drop. And it can also have an impact on gut health. So, you know, people with IBS often, again, if they're stressed, will get an IBS flare up, but it can also make those bad bacteria grow as well. So stress is really not a friend of endo. It really can make everything a lot worse, but it's really difficult because obviously having endo is really stressful. You know, you've got all this uncertainty around, when's my period going to start? Am I going to get a flare up? How long is it going to go on for? You know, what medical treatment do I go for? I'm on a waiting list. You know, that the condition causes stress, and then the stress makes the condition potentially worse. So we can get into a bit of a vicious cycle. And often it is, you know, like little tiny things that you can do that can make a difference. And actually with all of this, I would say, like, don't feel you need to be doing masses of stuff. Sometimes just starting small and building gradually can make a difference. And what I tend to get clients to do is just try and find 10 minutes in your day. So that might be 10 minutes before you go to bed at night, or maybe you can find 10 minutes at lunchtime or something, and do something that really helps you relax, that really helps take those stress levels down, because it will have a bit of a longer impact than the 10 minutes that you're doing it for. And it can really help to minimize the impact that stress has on our endo. So that might be having a soak in the bath, going out for a walk in nature, doing some breathing exercises, some gentle stretches, watching your favorite film that makes you laugh. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just making sure that you're doing something to get that stress level down. And ideally, the more you can do, the better. So if you can do like several 10-minute blocks a day, or maybe, you know, you can find a half an hour block, but start small and build up, and it really can help. I always say to people, what you want is to have almost like lots of these 10-minute little credits in your stress bank, so that if you do go through a stressful situation, you've got something to draw on to help. What you don't want is to sort of be overdrawn in your stress bank and then something stressful happens, because that's then often when it, you know, it does have quite an impact on endo symptoms. So what I thought I would very quickly do is just run through a case study of putting all this together. So this is a client that I worked with who's given me permission to kind of share her story, but I have just changed her name. So Olivia's in her early 40s, and when she came to see me, she'd only been diagnosed with endo around sort of 18 months or so before, largely because she'd had an ovarian cyst that burst. She ended up in A&E having emergency surgery, and they diagnosed the endo and removed the ovarian cyst. But actually a year later, she was getting pain again, and was told on the scan that these cysts were coming back and were about 2 centimetres. So when we started working together, she was getting pain before her periods and pain on her left-hand side on and off throughout the month, which we think was probably the ovary. She had a really horrible 2 weeks leading up to her period, where she had really bad PMS, she had no energy, she was feeling really bloated. All these things kind of happened throughout the month, but she just had this really like intense phase of it before her period. She would get diarrhea when her period was due. She used to get migraines. She was very stressed, and she was also pre-diabetic, so we know that her blood sugar level is going to be high, so that's going to have an impact on her hormones. So we worked together over 6 sessions. So this was over around like 4 to 5 months. So we didn't do all this at once, we did it gradually. But we increased her hydration to help with the migraines, to help, you know, flush things through the body. We really increased some of those anti-inflammatory foods, so omega-3 foods, so fruits and vegetables. We did a little bit of experimenting with particular foods to try and see if they had an impact or not on her symptoms, and gluten was definitely a bit of a trigger for her. So she reduced down gluten. She couldn't face taking it out completely because she was just like, it's too difficult, but she massively reduced it down. She also reduced sugar because of the pre-diabetic levels, and increased protein to try and help balance those blood sugar levels and help with their energy. We tried to do some lifestyle stuff on managing stress, and then we put some supplements in to help reduce the inflammation, to help with the bloating, to try and balance hormones, and then we added one in later as well to try and help with her stress levels. So by the end of the program, her bloating had reduced. So it hadn't completely gone away, but there was a big reduction in bloating. She didn't get diarrhea anymore. Her pain had reduced, so she was just getting this like occasional twinge on the left around the ovary. Her PMS felt more balanced, her energy felt more balanced, and she hadn't had any migraines for a couple of months, which was great. So this client did her package of 6 sessions, and then she sometimes came back for a follow-up session if something had changed, or just as a bit of a kind of check-in maintenance thing, really. And a couple of months after we'd finished working together, so it all seemed very positive, and she came back and she's like, it's all back again, it's all flaring up. And we sort of talked through what was going on, and she was going through this really stressful time at work. Her stress level had gone up and it had flared up all her symptoms. So we had to keep putting in more stuff around the stress management to try and help with that. But actually this client, as I say, does still come back sometimes, and I saw her a couple of months ago. And actually things are feeling under control again now. She's sort of worked on the stress, and she's also come out of that pre-diabetic range as well, which is great because that's really going to help with her hormone balance. So as I mentioned, so if anyone's watching back on the recording and you haven't got the chat, then the link to the ebook that I mentioned is here on this slide, or if you just go to my website emmabeltonnutrition.com, you'll see it on the front page, so you'll be able to get it there. What I didn't mention at the beginning is I talked a little bit in that case study about supplements. Supplements definitely can be really helpful with managing endo, particularly if you're in a place where your symptoms are quite bad, so they can sort of get things calmer more quickly. I don't go into details on supplements on these talks because it's really hard with supplements to give general advice. For there's a massive number of supplements you could use for endo, and it is about tailoring it to the individual. And basically for every supplement I could say there's always a caveat of, but oh no, if you've got this, or not if you're taking this medication. You do have to be quite careful with supplements, and again they are better if they're tailored to you as an individual. So I only do supplements in one-to-one sessions, not talks, but it doesn't mean that they're not really helpful. So I've just left my contact details up there, so if anyone does want to get in touch at any point. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Emma Belton Nutrition, and do kind of regular tips, advice and things on endo and hormone management. And if at any point anyone does want to chat a little bit more about whether nutritional therapy could work for you, or maybe you tried certain things and you want to know if it's worth trying something else, then you can always book in for a free hormone house review. So there's a link again on my website that will link you in with that, which is just a kind of chance to chat through symptoms, what's going on for you, and I can tell you a little bit more about how a sort of nutritional approach might work, what kind of package might work for you. So